Okay, take two. Had my mic muted the first time. Welcome to my PCL draft analysis for PCL Season 9. This is the Pokemon Championships League. Decided to join it because I wanted to. Oh, fuck me. One moment. Sorry about that. Had some changes I needed to make. So, this is a points based league with cut moves banned. So, it's like Pursuit, Return, and Hidden Power, stuff like that. Um, It's you have to draft 11 mons with 120 points. So you have to fill out a team of 11, which is pretty unfortunate because I kind of like the flexibility of points drafts. That's the main appeal to them to me. Obviously, plus you can get like really top heavy teams, which is pretty funny. But yeah, I ended up picking third overall. So there was a lot of shit available at that point. The first two mons that went were Dragapult and Spectrier, so I had like the whole kitty pool available to me. I could have grabbed, excuse me, like Mew, Tornti, shit I've used 86 times. Um, I could have grabbed Galarian Darm, stuff like that, but I ended up getting Urshifu because it was less than max points, which I feel like is kinda not the best because it's really kind of broken. Because Wicked Blow is one of the worst design moves I've just ever. Obviously, you can check this thing with like physically defensive fairies and Fizz Def like poison types. Not poison types. Am I fucking high on crack? What else was this? Dark types, but because it's part fighting, obviously I don't want to switch in super hard because you could just CC them and then they'll die. Depends on your set, really. But Banded Wicked Blow is really hard for a lot of people to switch into. Um, you have to have like a pretty much a dedicated check to this thing at Team Preview, unless you can check it with a few things on your team. Plus the fact that it can ignore Protect with its ability Unseen Fist. Prevents it from getting stalled out from Toxic Stall and shit like that, unless you sub up on it and you're faster. But I can't really think of a bulky mon that outspeeds this that wants to Toxic and then sub on it. Um, that can afford to lose all of the bulk from investing speed in to be faster than this. The only thing I can really think of that could possibly do that is Hydreigon, but even then, I think Wicked Blow still does too much to that thing, and you'd have to be max speed pretty much exactly. So, yeah, Hydreigon doesn't really deal with this mon super well if you're running a subtoxic set. So, yeah, this thing just hits super hard and it gets the momentum. Its speed tier is really nice. It speed ties stuff like Haxorus, and it outruns a good majority of the game. So bulky drafts are kind of worse for wear against this thing. It's the fact that Wicked Blow also ignores burns and intimidate is just insane. So because it's just a guaranteed crit, even though it's only 8 PP, it's still a really just stupid move to be honest. And it gets coverage for fairies and Iron Head and Poison Jab. So if you're running like a Life Orb set, then there you go. You can hit those things. So this thing's really good. Plus it's got priority with Sucker Punch. It's just a really good mon, honestly. So I'm glad to try it out. I wanted to get a really good fairy check next. A fairy check that isn't weak to fighting. So basically, a good steel type is what I'm trying to say. Is what I wanted next. And I had three in mind. I had Jirachi, Aegislash, and Ferrothorn in mind, but Ferrothorn kind of waned away after a while. It was pretty underpriced. I think it was 14 points. I feel like it should be like 15 maybe. Because Ferrothorn's really solid, especially in format. But I wanted one that wasn't weak to fighting, so I kind of ruled that one out. And I didn't really want to grab Ferrothorn round two, even though it's a decent Scald switching and shit like that. I decided in the end, Jirachi over Aegislash made more sense, because Jirachi is just like a much more solid mon. It's pretty relatively easy to play around in Aegislash, depending on what set you want to run, especially because what I wanted it for was to be a good partner with Urshifu, and felt like Jirachi does that a bit better because Urshifu switches in on Ghost and Dark type moves, and yeah, it does the same thing for Aegislash, but these two form a momentum core with U-turn and shit. So I like this a bit more. The fact that it can set up wishes for my team, get up screens, shit like that. I opened my Windows menu. Hopefully nothing weird came up there. It spreads T waves. Obviously, Serene Graces are an extraordinarily unbalanced ability. It hits relatively hard because it's got Pixie stats and it can tank hits naturally because Pixie stats are good. So it's a good rocker as well, and that's another reason I picked it up because I wanted a rocker early. Yeah, it's a good mon overall. I like Jirachi. I used this thing quite a few times, and It's been solid pretty much every time I've drafted it, and I've never been disappointed. Up next, I wanted a decent fairy type, as well as a good fairy check. As well, I want to pad out the fairy checks as much as possible in round three. I also wanted to get one of the best Urshifu counters off the board relatively early. I ended up grabbing Galarian Weezing. Now, this thing didn't last on my team because there was a grace period where you could drop Mons infinitely and not have it count towards your 6 free agents that you get throughout the season. Um, and I ended up seeing something after the draft that I was very surprised didn't get taken. So I ended up ridding myself of this Pokemon. So I really am not going to comment on it too much. I've never used this thing, and I've seen people use it. It's really annoying, and I think it's a pretty decent mon overall. It's better than I initially thought it would be because it's bulky enough and it's got support moves, and neutralizing gas is actually a pretty good ability. I think that's actually pretty cool. It's like Mold Breaker, but it actually works. Um, it works how you would think Mold Breaker would initially. Basically, it neutralizes all abilities as opposed to ignoring abilities. So it's a good support mon. It's a cleric with removal, and I got it because it hazard stacks as well. But I ended up dropping it because I wanted to make room. I had to sacrifice points here, and ended up dropping two other Pokemon in order to make room for something else at the end of the draft that we'll get into when I'm done reviewing my initial team. So up next, I got Zapdos because it was still there after 4 rounds, 3 rounds, I guess, three and some change rounds. I got it because it's Zapdos. And they buffed it because heavy duty boots first of all are really good on Zap because it's bulky, and its main problem before was that it got hit by rocks coming in, so it was 2KO'd by a lot of things. But now with boots, I mean, Jesus Christ, the fact that it ignores its rock weakness is insane. You don't have to run it either. You can bait people into thinking you're boots, and you can run like an offensive zap, especially because it's got fucking solid flying stab now on both sides. They gave it Brave Bird and Hurricane, so it's still got good coverage. Not having the cut moves in terms of Hidden Power and Signal Beam on this are relatively annoying, but I can still hit ground types decently hard and status them with Toxic, so I'm okay with the trade-off there. I think Zapdos is solid enough to where I wanted to grab it and keep it after the draft was over, so I kept Zapdos. I could have gotten Thundurus, which was a point less expensive, but I wanted Zapdos because it partners better with what I ended up picking up. And because it's a pretty solid mon, and I want to try it out with the new buffs. So, yeah, pretty strong, relatively fast, good momentum core. It's a nice defogger as well. So, yeah, up next I wanted to grab some speed, but this is one of the other mons I ended up dropping. There was another one later on. Like I said, I ended up dropping 3 things. So, not going to comment on this mon too much. It's Zygarde 10%. Got it because it was relatively fast and a decent wall breaker plus a setup threat. The fact that there's no HP ice means this thing doesn't get O-code as often, depending on what you're going up against. But I ended up dropping it, so not going to talk about it really much anymore. I drafted this thing once before and it was okay, but yeah, ended up getting rid of it. Next we get the 10-point Blissey deck. It's another Stealth Rocker, another Cleric, another Wish Passer. With Teleport, this thing support skyrockets pretty much. It's so you can run like a Wish Teleport set with this. The only problem is obviously that it's relatively passive, but its coverage move pool is extremely deep to where stuff that could set up on it really can't. So something that can set up, say, 101 HP substitutes like a Garchomp or a... What else was I thinking of before? What I was thinking of something else before that could set up 101 HP substitutes. I'll just say Excadrill for an example. Those two things, their substitutes get broken with Flamethrower and Ice Beam, not respectively, but you know what I mean. It breaks subs and can tank hits relatively well to the point where it can get off chip damage or status, whatever is trying to set up in front of it. And then can potentially work around whatever. The fact that it gets T-Wave and Toxic is really nice. It's pretty good for pretty much a lot of stuff on my team. It can set up screens as well, which is something Zapdos can also do. So that's pretty nice. I've got a few screen threats, which is nice. So this thing's a nice just support mon that gets momentum now because that's exactly what Blissey needed. So that's really good. And up next we've got the other mon I ended up dropping. I wanted more speed and some hazard stack, but what I ended up doing after this involved me getting rid of Excel Gore. So again, not gonna comment on it much further. It's pretty good this gen, but in league format, I feel like it's gonna be pretty decent. I think it's PU, isn't it right now? Yeah, but I think format's completely different to ladder, but it's a decent indicator, I guess, of where Mons could end up. This thing though, pretty good, but yeah, I ended up dropping it. So no further comments really. Up next, I was debating between three megas. Obviously, the one I went with was Glalie, but I was also considering Charizard X and Blastoise. Blastoise I felt like was a little too rich for my blood, even though the Rapid Spin buff is really good for it. 14 points on it. I wanted to grab other stuff, so Charizard X was 18 or 16 points, I think, or it was 15. It was 16. But I didn't want to have to grab too much hazard removal, and I wanted Glalie because A, I've never tried it before. B, I thought it was faster than it was. I thought it was 105 speed, but it's 100, but it's still pretty fast. And C, it looks fun, and it was only 8 points, so hey, even without return and frustration, the fact that Body Slam and Double Edge are still obviously in the game is pretty nice. Gets Boom, can hit Bulky Waters with Freeze Dry, it's Steel types with Earthquake, so I like this mon. I think it's actually relatively underrated. I don't think it's that great, obviously, because it's not super fast, but it is fast. You know what I mean? It hits pretty hard and has priority, which I felt like my team kind of needed at this point, especially because I figured I was dropping Zygarde after the draft was over, because I felt like I didn't draft a team that really suited it super well. So up next, I wanted to grab a spinner, and I need a little bit more hazard setting, and I wanted to get another rocker. So I ended up grabbing Torkoal with my next pick. So I grabbed Torkoal because I wanted another Fairy Resist, because obviously, what's it called? Urshifu is Super Fairy Weak, and I was looking at another Poison type after the draft that is neutral to Fairy, so I wanted to stack up on a decent chunk of them. And having a Fire type, being able to try and scare Steel types into staying on the bench, I think is pretty good, especially because that helps out Glalie a lot. With Zygarde plus Urshifu plus this, I feel like Steel types might want to stay at home because they're kind of fucked, depending on what they are. Like something like a Ferrothorn might want to stay on the bench because I have Torkoal plus Urshifu. Even though it's a good check to Glalie, it's a good check to Zygarde, it's a good check to Jirachi. And yeah, one moment. Sorry about that. So, like I was saying, Torkoal, Spinner, helps me clear enemy hazards without clearing my hazards that I set. So it helps out the scheme of what I'm trying to do with the next pick I make, and that's a good segue right into Leavanny, isn't it? So this is a pretty good Sticky Webber, for 3 points especially. I felt like I wanted to get a Grass type because I was looking a little water weak. This isn't bulky by any means. It's still a water resist, so especially with Sun being up, my team is a little less water weak, but I'm still conscious of the fact that my water resist is a Leavanny, and I guess a Blissey, but something like a Keldeo or a physical water type could just demolish me, like a Feraligatr, I guess, for an example. Because it's just hard to deal with those things with this team. So Sticky Webs are really good for Urshifu plus Jirachi and Zygarde possibly, and the thing I ended up dropping Weezing for. So that's it. It's pretty much just it. Considering the fact that it also has other support moves, it's got Heal Bell and Knockoff, as well as Magic Coat and Screens. I think those are sufficient enough, plus the fact that I can Baton Pass Swords Dances and Iron Defenses is pretty good for this thing. I think this thing is relatively solid for the price, especially considering that it's a low-tier Sticky Webber. That is the main reason I picked it up, but it also does other things that I could potentially make use of. And then for my final pick, I ended up getting Swampert. Now, I wanted a water type, but I also wanted to be able to block Volt Switches, and I wanted a ground type that I knew I could keep and I could work around with. So I didn't want to end up getting rid of Zygarde and not have an electric immunity, obviously, because I don't want shit to volt switch around me freely. So I ended up getting Swampert. And the fact that this thing gets flip turn now and it's still super bulky and HP Grass is out of the game frees this thing up really well. So it was 12 points, and I feel like definitely the right price for it at this point with the flip turn that it got and the fact that it can roar out setup threats. Shit like that, it hits relatively hard, 110 attack, plus it's got good dual stab and decent coverage. This thing's good. I like Swampert. So, transactions. So I ended up getting rid of Weezing because Lele was still there after the draft was over. And I felt like that was a crime against humanity because now I have a Urshifu and a Lele with Sticky Web, with relatively solid defensive core in terms of like Zapdos, Jirachi, Blissey, shit like that. I also have the Psychic Terrain boosting shit like Jirachi, like offensive Jirachis with Power Up Punch or Calm Mind sets. So I ended up grabbing Jirachi, or grabbing this instead of Weezing. So in order to make room for that, I had to drop a few things. This was 17 points. So Weezing was 11, so I had to make 6 points free somewhere. So I ended up dropping the 11 point Zygarde 10 for the 9 point Dragogi. That's not really how it really worked out, but I did a really weird thing where it looked like I had around 3 Floatzels. So I'll get into that in a minute, but I grabbed this because it was a good replacement for what Weezing brought to the team. I know it's not a poison type that resists Fairy, but it's still a good Fairy check because its Sped F is pretty high, and it doesn't switch in on Physical Fairy super well, but it still scares them out. It's got flip turn, which is nice, but I got this mainly because it's a T-Spiker. It gets T-Spikes, and that helps my team out quite a bit. I did end up dropping Excelgor as well, so being able to have that option in the back. After losing 2 T-Spikers, I wanted to have another one. And plus I wanted the grounded poison type to be able to soak up enemy T-Spikes to have that option as well. The fact that this thing hits super hard, gets a momentum move now, it's a pretty solid mon, in my opinion. And then I ended up dropping the 7-point Excelgor for the 3-point Floatzel to make room for Lele. So I wanted to grab the 4-point Frogadier and then have like a relatively slow team because I thought that would be interesting. But I fucking suck at math, so I had to grab a 3-point Floatzel instead. This thing I grabbed because the speed tier is nice. It's Scald Switch in. Even though it's not bulky, it still doesn't get burned. And it gets flip turn now as well, so that's good. It's pretty I just got it because the speed is nice. And it's a decent enough wall breaker at 105 attack. Like like banded sets are not super out of the question, stuff like that. It's a fast taunt mon as well. It's got setup, I guess, in terms of bulk up and not iron tail, agility. Does it get iron defense? I don't think so, no. Probably not. I'd have to check the DLC doc again, but yeah, this thing relatively solid for a 3-pointer. You know, it's better than nothing, you know what I mean? So yeah, had to fill out the 11 points, and I actually was looking at this thing for a while, and I was like, I kind of want to draft this thing one day, so why not now? So yeah, going over my team once again, just in case, just for the recap purposes, we got Urshifu, Jirachi, instead of Galarian Weezing. What I ended up doing was dropping this for Floatzel, to try and build up the points. So I had to drop my stuff first, so I ended up doing shit differently for the math. So Zapdos, this I dropped for Dragalge right here. And we got Blissey, Excelgor, which I ended up dropping for Tapu Lele. Mega Glalie, I almost said Mega Steelix, man. I'm tired. It's like 3 in the morning. Torkoal, Leavanny, and Swampert. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Week 1, I play... want to say Slackverix or something like that. I could check the doc, but Dallas Slackverix is a cool name that I just came up with out of nowhere. So that's his team name now. All right, thanks for watching. I appreciate it, everybody. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.